Currently, we think about English when we talk about the lingua franca, but will Chinese or another language replace it in the future? Don't forget to subscribe to Lang Explorer to show your support. In today's globalized world, English is used as the lingua franca in places such as airports, hotels, and tourist destinations that are frequently visited by thousands of foreigners who have no knowledge on the local language, as well as at international conferences where people with different mother tongues gather to discuss. In this video, we'd like to ponder on the history of how English became a lingua franca, and the possibility of another language, such as Chinese, French, Spanish, and Russian, to replace it in the near future. How about taking this opportunity to rethink the prerequisites to become a lingua franca? As we live in the 21st century, it's a hoarse sense for us that English is our lingua franca. No matter where you go for sightseeing around the world, English is spoken at airports, hotels, and major tourist attractions, and it isn't hard to find someone who can speak English in such places. But why did English become the lingua franca in the first place? And will any other language emerge in the near future to replace it? In fact, it was only relatively recently, in the late 19th and early 20th century, that English gained the status of a lingua franca. Until then, it wasn't English but French which was occupying this position in the Western world, and it was considered an etiquette among the upper class to study and acquire French regardless of which country they were from. Since these educated aristocrats were traditionally in charge of diplomacy, some of the diplomatic terms still have French origins. For example, when one country sends an ambassador to another one, the acceptance given by the receiving country is called agrément. Although the word is similar to the English word agreement, it's clearly French. English was able to take over the status of lingua franca from French thanks to the territorial expansion of the British Empire. The United Kingdom, at the beginning of the 19th century, controlled only parts of Australia, India, Africa, and so on, but since the middle of the century, it colonized different parts of the world and gained influence on other territories as protectorates and so on. For instance, by getting Hong Kong as a foothold into China after its victory at the Opium War and by taking possession of India and a significant portion of Africa. The United States also expanded its territory to the Pacific Ocean during this period, and its economic development gradually strengthened its influence on the world, making the English language increasingly important. Even so, French was often still regarded as superior to English during the 19th century, but English became the primary language used in the international community after World War I. The United Kingdom itself gradually lost its political and economic influence after World War II as its former colonies gained independence one after another, but the United States, another English-speaking country, turned into the superpower, so English was even more consolidated as a lingua franca itself, although it shifted from British to American English. This tendency was even more solidified as former British colonies continued to use English even after their independence, turning this language into the lingua franca among Asian and African countries. In addition, we'd like to emphasize that English is now taught as a first foreign language in every country. Especially until the end of the Cold War, French-speaking countries were reluctant to stimulate English language education, and other countries in Eastern Europe, such as Poland, East Germany, Hungary, and Romania, taught Russian instead of English. However, this situation changed drastically since the 1990s, and English is now the first foreign language for the younger generation in these countries. In Rwanda, a former Belgian colony in Central Africa, French used to be the official language, but it switched to English, so the older generation is more fluent in French, while the younger generation is better at English. In today's world, the superpower that rivals the United States is China, but regarding the language, it's unlikely that Chinese should replace English as lingua franca. Certainly, Chinese is the world's largest language in terms of native speakers, but it's only official in China, Taiwan, and Singapore, and, though Chinese is spoken among Chinese immigrants and their descendants all over the world, most of those who are ethnically non-Chinese don't study that language although they live in a country with a sizable Chinese community, such as Malaysia and Singapore. In addition, mastering Chinese characters is particularly difficult, and it's necessary to teach them intensively to kids at earlier ages to make it easier for them to learn them. But so far, no country is so eager to teach Chinese as a foreign language. The picture would be different, and a number of adults would be fluent enough in Chinese as second or third language if Chinese were compulsory in Japan, South Korea, and/or different Southeast Asian countries, but at least for now this is far from our reality. Furthermore, unlike English-speaking countries, China attracts few foreigners to move to, either to study or to immigrate, which is another reason why Chinese remains little popular as lingua franca. Regarding French, as we've just seen, its use has declined considerably since the beginning of the 20th century, when its position as lingua franca was superseded by English. Although it's still quite likely to be chosen if an international conference took place under the condition that English is forbidden, and it still has a non-negligible number of students all over the world, its use is mainly limited to Europe and Africa, making this language little useful in Asia and Americas. More Asians would be learning French even today if it were still official in former French Indochina, namely Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam, but nowadays, it isn't official anymore in Asia. In the Americas, French is used only in some parts of Canada, particularly Quebec, on top of Haiti, some islands in the Caribbean Sea, and a few more French territories. It's little probable, therefore, that people on these continents will be eager to study French in the near future. However, the population is still growing quickly in French-speaking African countries, and chances are that the French will return under the footlight if such countries experience significant economic growth. On the other hand, we can mention Spanish as a language with some potential to become a lingua franca in the future. It's already used so in Latin America, and more people are learning Spanish in Brazil, a Portuguese-speaking country. In addition, as shown in the previous video, millions of Spanish speakers live in the United States, where, in some areas, Spanish is used on a daily basis. Furthermore, Spanish is becoming increasingly popular as a foreign language not only in the United States but also in Europe, and it isn't uncommon for non-native speakers who have learned this language to speak it among themselves. In Asia, more and more call centers are established in the Philippines due to the time difference. And Filipinos are beginning to study Spanish because of the good salary. Also, various music genres in Spanish, such as salsa and bachata, are becoming popular outside of the Spanish-speaking world, and some people are learning Spanish as they love such music. However, it would be unrealistic to expect Spanish to turn into another lingua franca, a status that English currently enjoys. While Spanish itself is a reasonably popular foreign language, especially in Europe and the United States, no Spanish-speaking country is globally as influential as China or France, nor are there any prestigious universities in Spanish-speaking countries. While it's undoubtedly fun to interact with cheerful people in Spanish-speaking countries, and this language is popular precisely because of this, such a motivation won't be enough for Spanish to be a lingua franca, rivaling that of English. It's also true that Spanish is still little used in Asia and Africa, so it's far from being globally used. In the video we mentioned earlier, we discussed the possibility of Spanish becoming an official language in the United States, but Spanish won't be a lingua franca unless it becomes an official language in the United States and is used even more widely than it is now. As for Russian, which used to be the lingua franca of Eastern Europe, it's unlikely to regain the influence it used to have. During the Cold War, Eastern European countries had solid ties with the Soviet Union because they were in the communist bloc, so Russian was used there as the lingua franca. But now, English is much more commonly used even in these countries, and it's rare to find younger people who speak good Russian. In addition, an increasing number of countries where education was given in Russian during the Soviet era have switched to their respective national language and English since independence, and the Russian invasion of Ukraine that began in 2022 has undoubtedly strengthened this trend for such countries to stay away from Russian. Although it's true that Russian is still spoken quite widely outside of Russia, its influence is waning compared to the past, and we have to say that the possibility of Russian returning to the lingua franca in the future is very low. So, after examining different languages, We can conclude that the status of lingua franca after English is currently contested between French and Spanish, and that although China has indeed become a significant economic power, it's quite difficult for her language to occupy the status now enjoyed by English because of the deficient number of those who have mastered it as a foreign language. In fact, the current picture shows that English is further consolidating its position as the lingua franca, and that such a situation won't change unless global circumstances change drastically for some reason in the future. Now, let's summarize what we've learned today. 1. English achieved the lingua franca status only in the late 19th century, thanks to the global influence of both the British Empire and the United States. The British Empire collapsed with the independence of its colonies, but the fact that English continued to be used in the former colonies also contributed to the consolidation of English as a lingua franca. 2. Although China is increasing its influence on the rest of the world, when it comes to its language, the number of its speakers is still deficient out of China. It would be necessary to train more people to be fluent in Chinese so this language can be a lingua franca, but the current situation is far from that. 3. French is a former lingua franca, but it's unlikely to regain this status because its speakers are primarily concentrated in Europe and Africa, while it's little spoken in Asia and the Americas. However, the situation may change as French-speaking Africa begins to achieve economic growth. 4. Spanish has established itself as a lingua franca in Latin America, with an increasing number of speakers in the US, and has become a popular foreign language in Europe. But it's difficult to spread, especially in Asia and Africa, due to the lack of Spanish-speaking countries with a global influence. It could be another lingua franca, however, if Spanish becomes more widely used in the US. 5. Russian used to be the lingua franca of the communist bloc, but since the end of the Cold War, East European countries have switched to English education, and the Russian invasion of Ukraine has further accelerated the de-Russification, making it difficult for Russian to regain its lingua franca status. 6. Therefore, French and Spanish are currently competing for the position of lingua franca after English, followed by Chinese. In fact, English is steadily consolidating its position as a lingua franca, and it's unlikely that English will drop out of this position in the near future. Thank you for watching this video. We're looking forward to seeing you in the next one.